Ahí estamos.
Buenas tardes, un gusto estar compartiendo con ustedes esta última actividad del CIM durante 2020, durante este año tan particular. Welcome to this CIM conversation. We thank you very much for your participation. The reason is to share with you the perceptions on the dilemmas of mediatization today. That is why we organize this international and multilingual meeting. We want to especially thank Mariana Busso, who is coordinator of the International Academic Relations area of the CIM. Thanks again to everyone for your participation. So now the meeting begins with the coordination of Mariana. Seguimos en Spanglish y bueno, un gusto tenerlos a todos acá. Luego esto va a estar colgado en YouTube. Paolo de Toronto, Canadá, Mon de Sheffield Hallam en Inglaterra y Gastón de la UNA Buenos Aires y todos nosotros acá escuchando y luego participando. Bueno, Mariana, te dejo la coordinación, cierro mi micrófono.
Bueno, hola a todos, gracias nuevamente por estar aquí y bienvenidos a esto que es el último evento del año del CIM, Centro de Investigaciones en Mediatizaciones, evento que hemos llamado Tiempos Mediatizados, una conversación internacional en el año de la pandemia. En este año tan especial, donde hemos atravesado mutaciones y tensionamientos hasta hace poco impensables, en lo que a experiencias vitales se refiere, podríamos decir, tanto subjetivas como colectivas, como profesionales y muchos, etcétera, decidimos cerrar este 2020 invitando a 3 miembros del CIM que a partir de sus recorridos pudieran reflexionar y compartir con nosotros sus miradas sobre lo que esta pandemia nos ha dejado, en especial en lo que a mediatización e investigación se refiere. Por eso en el rato que sigue van a dialogar entonces con nosotros Pablo Granata, de la Universidad de Toronto, Canadá, Mon Rodríguez Amat, de la Universidad de Sheffield Hallam, en Gran Bretaña, y Gastón Cingolani, de la Universidad Nacional de las Artes en Argentina. Ahora les voy a contar brevemente sobre cada uno de ellos. Para organizarnos, cada uno de ellos tendrá aproximadamente unos 15 minutos para exponer, tras lo cual vamos a abrir al diálogo entre los tres y luego las intervenciones del público. Voy a contar un poquito esto también en inglés, por si hay alguien escuchando en esa lengua, y después, bueno, les voy a mencionar brevemente el currículum de cada uno de los expositores. Estábamos diciendo entonces, hello everybody, welcome to the last event of the year of the CIM, Centro de Investigaciones en Mediatizaciones, that we called Mediatization Times, an international conversation in the pandemic year. In this very special year, we have gone through several tensions and mutations unthinkable not so long ago regarding our life experiences, subjective, collective, professional, and many, many etc. So we decided to close this 2020 by inviting 3 members of the CIM who could think about and share with us their views about the legacy of this pandemic, especially concerning mediatization and research. So, we are pleased to introduce Pablo Granata from the University of Toronto in Canada, Mon Rodríguez Amat from the Sheffield Hallam University in the UK, and Gastón Cingolani from the Universidad Nacional de las Artes in Argentina, that will lead the dialogue. Each of you will have 15 minutes. After that, we will open the dialogue between the 3 of you, and then we will hear the interventions of the audience. Comenzará Pablo Granata, que es profesor en el programa Book and Media Studies de la Universidad de Toronto, a la que llegó luego de haber trabajado 15 años en la Universidad de Bolonia, Italia, donde desarrolló gran parte de su carrera académica en lo que tiene que ver con investigación y enseñanza. Es el coordinador del programa BMS y director del Media Ethics Lab de la Universidad de Toronto. También es el presidente de la Media Ecology Association y desde octubre de 2018 El profesor Granata es miembro del Comité Ejecutivo de la Comisión Canadiense en la UNESCO, como catedrático en la Comisión de Cultura, Comunicación e Información Sectorial. Gastón Cingolani es semiólogo e investigador en comunicación, es director del Instituto de Investigación y Experimentación en Arte y Crítica de la Universidad Nacional de las Artes y es profesor de grado y posgrado en Mediatizaciones y Estética en el área de Crítica de Artes de la UNA y en la Universidad Nacional de La Plata. Se doctoró en la Universidad de Buenos Aires con especialidad en lingüística y publicó Discursividad Televisiva en 2006 como editor y coautor y Cristina, un espectáculo político en 2019 con Mariano Fernández. Y actualmente es el presidente de la Asociación Argentina de Semiótica. Y Joan Ramón Rodríguez Amat, o Mon, es Principal Lecturer, coordina el Máster de Media y Global Communications y es director de Innovación e Investigación en el Departamento de Media, Artes y Comunicación de la Universidad Sheffield Hallam en el Reino Unido, a la que llegó luego de su postdoctorado en la Universidad de Viena. Mon estudia la geografía y el espacio de la comunicación con una especial debilidad por los geomedia y los datos geolocalizados, y se fija en las tecnologías de la comunicación como un territorio político definido por lo que se puede llamar gobernanza comunicativa. En ese sentido, su atención a la economía política de las telecomunicaciones se junta con el análisis de los discursos sobre datos, sobre lugares y sobre aparatos tecnológicos. Bueno, hecha esta breve introducción, escuchamos entonces a los tres expositores, empezando por Paolo. Paolo, thank you very much.
Hola a todos, hablo poco español, so if you don't mind, I will speak in English and maybe Italian. Buongiorno, buonasera, here from Toronto. It's pretty cold out here, but it's great, and I see your warm climate here welcoming, and so it's great to be here together. So I'm going to speed up. I have a lot of things to say, and I have a title actually for my presentation. I hope you can see. Sign of unprecedented times, it's quotation marks, unprecedented, uncertain times. I'm going to take a linguistic approach to reflect on the global narratives that are shaping the way we are coping with this global pandemic, and so how language can really help us to understand the very idea of semantic environment, which is another keyword I'm using here. I take the very label of semantic environment from Neil Postman and the general semantics tradition, but also it's connected to the idea of semiosphere, the Tartu school, Yuri Lotman, and structural semiotics, the idea that there is an invisible environment, sphere, within which we undertake our daily life. And this semantic sphere affects the way we think, the way we feel, the way we make sense of the world around us. I'm also close to the very idea of putting the semantic environment in Roland Barthes terminology, the new myths, mythologies, the idea that there are things that we take for granted, right? That go without saying, and because we take them for granted, we do not reflect enough on how they impact our global thinking. And so this is the idea of semantic environment. And in practical terms, this is another example of semantic environment. So if you walk, I think, hopefully, in the Buenos Aires streets right now, you may find something like this. So our actual urban environment has been visually shaped, right, by new signs, new ways of communicating what's going on there. And why unprecedented? It's such an important keyword for today. You know that every year, at the end of the year, Oxford releases the word of the year, right? So every year, we have a few examples. You may remember last year was climate emergency, not climate change, climate emergency. Back in 2016 was post-truth, right? Another word of the year. So This year, they couldn't come up with one word. They couldn't make it. There are too many words that are shaping the current year. And so eventually they find a solution to say words of the unprecedented year. Actually, to my interpretation, unprecedented is the word of the year. Unprecedented, the very word of the year. Uncertain. And I think there is a Spanish translation. This is from the official government of Argentina, and sin precedentes, right? Sin precedentes. I think it's the same semantic realm even in Spanish. And so the semantic environment changed dramatically, right, since the beginning of the pandemic. Well, we will reflect on the very word pandemic later. However, so changing in the semantic space, right, around us. So think about the most important monuments. All this is Mecca. Have you ever seen the Black Stone in Mecca so emptied, right? No people around there. And this is actually the Plaza de Mayo in Buenos Aires, right? So it's completely empty, unbelievably. And this emptiness, right, is part of the semantic environment within which we live. So this is something important. But not only we do cope with our urban space, personal relationships. And so, hello, this is the new way we interact each other. So body and physicality changed, right? So again, another way of communication, the way we are rethinking, right, how we do interact, we keep in touch each other. And so not by chance, everything, okay, this is the Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau in Canada, but everything started back in February. You may remember, we were not really aware of the global pandemic. We started laughing a little bit. There was a video on TikTok, the Wuhan foot shake. So at that time, we didn't realize that it was such a big, huge global pandemic coming all throughout the world. But again, this is a change in the way we react and create a different semantic environment using our body. And in fact, that's I think it's a good question. Will COVID-19 mark the death of the handshake? So probably the handshake, it's the thing of the past, the 20th century. It's a 20th century thing, no anymore. And how the semantic environment changed. This is another change. So this is Italy, the Italian balconies singing all together, establishing, right, kind of communication using the urban space, using balconies to, well, foster the sense of togetherness. Togetherness is another keyword of the pandemic, to express in creative forms, right, to reconfigure the semantic environment. Also, we learned a lot in terms of numbers and statistics and facts and visualizations. The curve is another keyword of the year, right? And so we learned how to cope with this visualization, flattening the curve. I think there is a Spanish expression that expresses the same thing. So flattening the curve. So the pandemic was a curve, right? It was a visual representation. So the semantic environment was a kind of numeric representation of the global pandemic. And I think this is maybe the most common, is a Johns Hopkins research observatory for the real-time pandemic. And so the semantic environment changed, and lots of visualizations. But our home environment changed, right, as well. This is a crowded private spaces. You may experience something like that with kids at home, homeschooling, or home working. We will come back later to that. Lots of, new semantic environment in our private environment. So our private home became a public space. This is crucial, right? And because we have a chance to at least mediate this private space into a public, like right now, into a public space, that's another trend, the dress waist up. So essentially, you see and I bet some of you, including myself, is wearing a pajama right now on the bottom, and maybe sleepers, right? So, but we don't care, because it doesn't matter. So it matters only what we see on that camera, on that screen. And this is another way we are reshaping, right, the way we communicate. Zoom etiquette. Okay, we are not on Zoom today, so I'm glad you are using Google Meet. Google Meet. But essentially, there is Microsoft Meets, Teams, and Zoom, of course, is the most important thing. So there is a nice joke: the more you Zoom, the less you focus. But there is a Zoom etiquette. We learned how to mute and unmute. Unmuting is another keyword. So to really again express how important it is to establish these things. Then there are a few oxymorons that are shaping our global thinking in terms of the pandemic. Social distancing is I couldn't find a translation in Spanish. You may help me, but social distancing is the most if it is social, it cannot be distancing, so it's an oxymoron. So they don't. However, we learned this thing. It's a kind of we may take into account Edward T. Hall, the prosemics, right? The idea of how to manage the space in between. But again, the new etiquette, the social distancing, to some extent shaped. And social distancing means again even the way we redesign the elevators or any public spaces around us. Again, language matters. The new normal. Another oxymoron. If it's new, it's not normal. It's something different. And so the new normal is another oxymoron that we learned, and we like it. People like it. Or maybe, okay, we have to build a new normal, something different. Oh no, I want to back to the old normal. So we have been playing with that very word, normal. And well, yes, the great equalizer, that was another keyword back in March. The COVID, we are all equal, we are all together. It's an equalizer. So that being said by a pop star from her bathtub in a millionaire house, right? So I just realized I'm in the same bathtub with Madonna. And so rather than an equalizer, actually, we realized the COVID pandemic is an intensifier. Everything is intensified. Even social inequalities have been intensified by the global pandemic. And this is important. It was not an equalizer. However, many media and news lied. There were many concerns, but lied the idea, okay, equalizer, we are all together, all the same in front of the COVID. No, this COVID pandemic is enhancing social inequalities. And then the unprecedented times, unprecedented signs are always, and also visual sign. This is to my mind, the icon, the emoji of the year. So the caring emoji, right? So we needed a new emoji because there was nothing such this kind of emoji for expressing. So Facebook and others soon came up with the idea of a care emoji. And because we need signs, right? Specific signs to express new narratives. The narrative of taking care of each other. And I like this one. This is not actually, it's an artist interpretation. It's a mix between caring and wandering. So it's an empty signifier, we may say, that it's kind of confusing. However, all these narratives have been captured by the global imagination. If you Google, there is a nice video. It's called "Every COVID-19 Commercial is Exactly the Same." So they all look the same. Same language, same narrative, same words, right? Talking about the words of the year. And particularly to dive into the narratives, I think that is the most effective. The war. So we were in a war. The new war, a battle for health, for humanity, right? And these are the fighters that are fighting. The military language, right, as a semantic environment, is deeply affecting the way we are coping with the global pandemic, right? And because we have a war, we have some heroes, the new heroes, and here they are, the frontline workers. And not by chance, frontline is a military word, right? Frontline, it comes from the military semantic realm. And so we borrowed that semantic realm to, again, the frontliners, the workers, a military language, the battle, the warriors. They were really fighting the virus. However, there is the counter hero. So if there is an hero, we know in the field of structural semiotics and the counter hero here, not Superman, super spreader. That's another keyword of the year. The super spreader, you know, people who were able to be particularly socially engaged, and so they were super spreaders. And so the enemy, right? Not only the virus, but even people acting as super spreaders. And again, the military. I think the highest peak of the military language is the curfew, the toque de queda, right? Toque de queda, the curfew. So it's a military word. So all at home. It's deeply impacting, right? It's deeply impacting. And I think the same wording circulated in Argentina. Color coding. We started thinking in terms of different codes. That zona roja, the red zone, used to be a kind of erotic neighbor in some cities. No, now the red zone is, some, unfortunately. But we think it in a different way in terms of color, and gray and green and orange, right? We needed this kind of colorful narrative to make sense of what's going on. Another crucial keyword is infodemic. Again, a kind of neologism because it was employed already for the SARS back in 23, and information epidemics, and we couldn't actually manage, right, the amount of information generated during the pandemic. Of course, mask is a keyword for the year in review and for the semantic environment. Mask, the Greek origin of the word mask means persona, identity. This is very meaningful. And also, this is a commercial by the CNN. Mask is not a political statement. It's just a mask, they say, right? And mask actually has been employed in different ways. For instance, scientists were able to express a sense of trust in science, right? Showing this, again, imaginaries that help fostering trust in science. And then, of course, on the other hand, the anti-mask wanted to counterbalance that narrative and so on. Then we have a new neologisms, such as, that's my favorites, coronials, corona and millennials, so the people born this year, so the new generation. Covidiots, you may familiar with, Cov idiots. Quarantine, not like Microsoft Teams. Frontliners, right? Frontline. And this is beautiful. Plandemic. Plan because conspiracy theories. Plan means that the pandemic has been planned, right, to control and so on. The plandemic. And all this in the same blender comes into the idea of pandemedia. This is a neologism I have created. Maybe it was already there, but I like it, the pandemedia. So even media couldn't really deal with the language. And media as well started fostering the same language, the same narratives, the war military narrative around us. But of course, for any war, there are the heroes and there are finally the solutions. And this is the vaccine, finally delivered. There is a beautiful imagery on the vaccine, and I'm going to conclude where those heroes, which are private companies that will make a lot of money thanks to the vaccines, actually. However, we have seen this beautiful white trucks. This is Canada. White trucks bringing the vaccines. The actual here, the hero's journey finally ending and bringing the solution. And that was the second ever person vaccinated in the UK. named William Shakespeare from Warwickshire, and it's real. It's a William Shakespeare, and I think that was a perfect combination on that pandemedia. Right? The media started even creating and sometimes even joking on this. Well, individual who pretty lucky to get vaccinated for second. So in a real name, it's William Shakespeare. I want to conclude with this. I think it comes from Argentina or Spanish. The La vacuna somos todos, right? And that's, I think, a perfect combination of the semantic environment within which we live. So we are the vaccinations, we are the vaccine. So we are part of this. We are in the story. The semantic environment is so effective that we are on it. And we play this role of heroes. We are the heroes, right? Because we are the vaccine. And, well, I have many other things to say on the very idea that the La vacuna somos todos. Maybe later, because I'm running out of time. However, for those who wish to review this informal presentation, because I wanted just to share some ideas, but for those who want to review this informal presentation, this is the unprecedented word search puzzle. I did it for you, my friends, so I'll be happy to share a PDF, and so you can enjoy over the holidays to play with unprecedented word search puzzle. So you can see lockdown and all the words I've been mentioning are there, so you can keep reflecting on how the semantic environment, the language we use, and the language channeled by media as well, shape the global narratives. And sometimes we are not aware of it. We take them for granted. And so because we are semioticians, we can at least try to foster awareness of the semantic environment around us. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Paolo. Thank you so much. Very interesting, and thank you for sharing your ideas with us. Now we will go with Gastón Cingolani. Ahora vamos a seguir con Gastón y luego, por supuesto, vamos a volver sobre estas cuestiones para dialogar.
Bueno, buenas tardes. Voy a hablar en español, voy a hablar lentamente para los colegas y las colegas que hablan en otras lenguas. Primero felicito al comentario interesante y también divertido que hizo Paolo. No voy a poder estar a la altura, pero igualmente, pero es por mi pesimismo nada más, no por otra cosa. Pero igualmente voy a comentar algunas cosas que entiendo están bastante en sintonía con sus comentarios. Yo quería hablar bien de la pandemia, que no tiene sentido, digamos, uno no podría hablar bien o mal de fenómenos que se producen espontáneamente y que tal vez no tienen detrás un ánima o una intención establecida. Se produce como un fenómeno meteorológico y uno no puede hablar bien o mal de la lluvia como si eso fuera pasible de ser opinable, pero no hace falta mucho para poder establecer un punto de vista y decir que en algunos aspectos, fuera de los obvios, creo que la pandemia ha sido tremendamente auspiciosa o estimulante para por lo menos para quienes estamos observando los procesos sociales por profesión como mínimo o por obsesión por lo menos. En ese sentido, y voy solo a focalizar en un aspecto de los tantos que probablemente la pandemia nos haya regalado como oportunidad de observación, es focalizar en ese aspecto que algunas teorías ya desde hace bastante tiempo, vienen planteando, que funcionamos, y muy en serio, como redes, ¿no? Ese aspecto me parece que es uno de los aspectos o dimensiones que las ciencias sociales atienden o deberían atender todavía más, que es, funcionamos en la dimensión de una red, más allá de que podemos discutir exactamente qué se entiende por redes exactamente, porque hay diferentes visiones y diferentes conceptualizaciones de lo que es una red. Pero no va a haber tiempo de discutir exactamente ese aspecto, así que voy a hacer una especie de rápida alusión técnica a la idea de redes que ha traído el nuevo pragmatismo, digamos, los nuevos pensadores pragmatistas, sobre todo desde el universo de la sociología francesa contemporánea, no únicamente, pero lo pongo como rápidamente como un horizonte de intertexto. Y respecto de eso, está claro que se nos hicieron visibles redes que estaban ahí, estuvieron ahí, y a lo mejor algunas desde hace muchísimo tiempo, es decir, estaban muy aferradas a nuestra cotidianidad, como actores sociales, quiero decir, y al mismo tiempo aparecieron, o se transformaron, o aparecieron nuevas redes. Eso es un aspecto que a mí me resulta interesante de esto que está pasando. La parte que yo encontré más interesante es la de poder volver visibles algunas cosas que a veces no vemos por lo que decía recién, por la cotidianidad. Pero definitivamente el momento actual nos trajo a la digamos, a la claridad, o mayor claridad, el hecho de que la división hecha o formulada en distintos momentos por las ciencias sociales, lamentablemente sostenida, tal vez José Luis Fernández, que es un especialista en Lévi-Strauss, me puede corregir, pero entiendo que Lévi-Strauss ha sido el último cientista social que sostuvo todavía de manera muy interesante, pero podemos discutirla, la distinción entre naturaleza y cultura. Me parece que esta etapa nos trajo como muchos problemas para observar respecto de que esa división tal vez no sea lo beneficiosa que pudo parecer en una larga etapa de configuración de las ciencias sociales. Y la otra entidad, es decir, podríamos volver a revisar eso a la naturaleza, no como en un costado externo, no una frontera externa a lo social, humano, sino claramente como una especie de lo humano como partícipe y necesariamente fronteras adentro de las condiciones de vida que podríamos llamar, si tal cosa existe, la naturaleza. Porque ahora el problema es el contrario, cómo definimos la naturaleza si no es por oposición a la cultura, qué parte de la naturaleza no estamos incluyendo. Y en eso quiero traer, por si todavía no es obvio, por lo menos quizás lo sea para quienes hace tiempo discutimos sobre estas cosas, que la otra clase de entidad que debe estar también incluida en esa misma red es el conjunto de las tecnologías, es decir, aquello que no podríamos llamar bajo ningún punto de vista, quiero discutir eso, lo natural, porque son tecnologías inventadas por el hombre, por la humanidad, estarían del lado del mundo humano, pero aún así no las reconoceríamos en la misma dimensión que las redes sociales, es decir, que la socialización. Llamaban la atención numerosos investigadores, entre los más cercanos a nosotros, el propio Eliseo Verón, que si uno lee la sociología más importante de finales del siglo XIX e inclusive casi el primer cuarto del siglo XX, o por lo menos los primeros 10 o 15 años del siglo XX, uno puede leer esos libros de sociología, los más importantes y emblemáticos, y tener la impresión, si uno fuera un marciano, de que desde ningún punto de vista hay medios en esa sociedad. En esa sociedad parece que no hubiera imprenta, no hubiera cine, no hubiera fotografía. Es una sociedad sí con otras tecnologías, sí está la industria, pero no hay mediatización. Y tal vez lo que estuvo pasando en este último tiempo, finales del siglo XX y comienzos del XXI, que todavía parece como todo el tiempo una cuestión novedosa y hasta asombrosa, los modos en los cuales hemos incorporado tecnologías de la mediatización en nuestra vida cotidiana, que tal vez los que nos parece mucho tiempo y una especie intrusión novedosa, mucho tiempo sin eso y una intrusión novedosa, a lo mejor es algo que la humanidad ni tardó tanto, aunque nos parece mucho tiempo, en incorporar, ni es tan ajeno o ajeno a la propia sustancia humana, la de correlacionarse o socializarse a través de las tecnologías. Es decir, lo simplifico así, las redes, en las cuales se nos hicieron más que nunca evidentes en esta pandemia, no digo que sucedieron en esta pandemia, sino que ya estaban, pero nos lo subrayó la pandemia, es que las redes están compuestas tanto de humanos como de naturaleza, como de tecnologías, y siempre fue así. Y solo ahora, tal vez por cierto trastocamiento o ciertas acentuaciones novedosas por la circunstancia particular, se nos volvió más evidente porque casi que nos golpeó en la cabeza, digamos, el fenómeno, los fenómenos, los procesos. Bueno, esto había libros ya que venían insistiendo sobre esto desde antes. Por supuesto, tal vez las dos mejores críticas a esa división, sobre todo la parte de la división entre naturaleza y cultura, del lado de Jean-Marie Schaeffer o de Philippe Descola, pero bueno, y con respecto tal vez a la frontera con lo tecnológico, probablemente autores cercanos al pragmatismo francés, entre ellos el propio Bruno Latour, ya también han insistido bastante sobre eso desde antes, pero me pareció que en este tiempo esas teorías se confirmaron al menos sus mejores intuiciones, encontraron que lo que está sucediendo las confirmaron, por así decirlo, o volvieron sobre sus fundamentos. Y entonces voy a hacer así algunos comentarios muy rápidos y apenas iniciales para seguir discutiendo esto, que es que esas teorías tienen una segunda ventaja para mí, o interés. Una es este aspecto, ya dije, de pensar fuera, o distintas al menos esas fronteras, o inclusive tratar de extirpar, anular esas fronteras entre lo humano, lo natural y lo tecnológico. Y por otro lado, en tratar de partir siempre de los fenómenos, como le gusta decir acá, otra vez lo voy a citar a nuestro amigo Fernández, José Luis, partir de los fenómenos locales o micro. Y creo que esto es una cuestión más fenomenológica de mi parte, pero me pasó que también me empezó a llamar la atención fenómenos tan cotidianos e insulsos, insípidos hasta ese momento, que se volvieron sumamente importantes, como por ejemplo conocer las propiedades de la espuma del jabón. Digamos, pasamos toda una vida lavándonos las manos con jabón, y yo siempre creí que la espuma era o una especie de cosa, digamos, secundaria, casi un efecto colateral, no nocivo ni negativo, pero estaba ahí, o inclusive una especie de fantasía divertida, casi de efecto de la industria con interés comercial, que el jabón haga espuma, digamos. Podía no hacerlo y estaba todo bien, pero no, parece que lo único importante del jabón es que hace espuma, y que ahí está la propiedad verdaderamente higienizante y desinfectante del jabón más básico de todos, ¿no es cierto? No es que hay que pensar en jabones muy sofisticados. Bueno, no yo solo, digo, todo el mundo hemos convivido con eso. Yo no sé cuánta gente se enteró de eso, yo me enteré hace unos meses de este asunto. Y lo que se modifica no son necesariamente entonces las entidades con las que convivimos, sino las escalas. Se han trastocado las escalas de esa convivencia. Por ejemplo, pasar mucho más tiempo o mucho menos tiempo en situaciones que respecto a lo que pasábamos antes. Y eso ya no hace falta, también la fenomenología la trabajó mucho, la percepción y la concepción del tiempo cotidiano y también de las dislocaciones temporales, tanto el tiempo individual con respecto al tiempo colectivo o el tiempo grupal, los tiempos que nos parecen tremendamente acotados en un momento del día y insoportablemente extensos en otro momento del día, que medidos con el maravilloso elemento que es el reloj, siempre nos recuerda que esas sensaciones son puramente psicológicas. Solamente se pudo descubrir eso cuando hubo un objeto, una terceridad tecnológica que nos lo pudo demostrar, ¿no es cierto? De la misma manera, creo, la pandemia viene a funcionar como ese asunto. Nos vino a trastocar la percepción o la escala de las percepciones para hacernos evidente algunas cuestiones que estábamos familiarizados. Lo mismo con la espacialidad. El juego de la espacialidad también se volvió un ejercicio otra vez interesante por su trastoque. La cuestión de... Quizás hasta se invirtió la relación con el espacio que podríamos llamar público o privado, muy groseramente, digo, el espacio hogareño y el espacio de la socialidad callejera, perdón, de la calle, no de la socialidad, de la calle, y de golpe aquello que a lo mejor habitaba la socialidad en el espacio de la calle o del trabajo, del lugar que claramente llamaríamos público, y guardábamos otras clases de relaciones, inclusive la, entre comillas, no socialidad del hogar, se invirtió. Prácticamente concentramos toda la socialidad en nuestro hogar. Y la otra dimensión, o la otra escala, que es la escala de la intercorporalidad, que nos llamó la atención, como por ejemplo en Argentina, no sé si en otros países pasó algo parecido, habría que revisar ahí los glosarios y las terminologías que trajo el colega Pablo recién, acerca de, por ejemplo, llamarle ASPO, aislamiento social preventivo obligatorio, o DISPO, distancia social, que está desde el vamos mal constituido. La verdad es que no hubo ni hay aislamiento social, ni distancia social. Hay aislamiento físico o distancia física. Porque socialidad no dejó de haber. En todo caso se transformaron las costumbres, las reglas, las condiciones con las cuales nos socializábamos, pero no hubo aislamiento social. En ese sentido, también el cambio de digamos, las paradojas que se produjeron con respecto a esa relación entre lo físico y lo social. Por ejemplo, a través de la afectividad o del cuidado. Siempre para nosotros, los latinos más, así que acá estamos todos entre amigos, la afectividad y el cuidado se expresa en la cercanía, en la proximidad, y cuanto más proximidad física y más cercanía física, tal vez eso nosotros lo usamos como un modalizador o un gradiente de ese cuidado, de ese afecto. Mientras que en este momento eso se invirtió. Te cuido más cuanto más me alejo, cuanto más distancia física establezco contigo, ¿no? El cuerpo es lo que hay que mantener separado para mantener unido un cuidado y una afectividad. Y el acercarte es un problema de descuido o inclusive de falta de interés o importancia por el otro. Y el otro, ya lo mencionaron hoy, la otredad, hoy hablaban de estoy buscando acá en el chat, la vacuna es el otro, ¿no? Que en realidad esta cuestión de definir siempre el otro, que es un larguísimo problema antropológico casi fundacional de la antropología, o fundacional, digamos, se nos redefinió el otro también. Es decir, ¿qué es la otredad? Cuando recién se decía, bueno, es tal vez uno de los primeros o el primer fenómeno que sucede efectivamente de manera global, y entonces la otredad en algunas dimensiones queda como anulada, estamos todos inmersos en la misma situación, pero sin embargo, obviamente no se puede socializar ni vivir sin la otredad, así que lo que sucedió en realidad es que se redefinen esas relaciones, esas fronteras, y eso también ha quedado comprendido en esta serie de dislocaciones o de cambios de grados y de escalas de las relaciones sociales. Así que, sencillamente, bueno, quería decir esto, digamos, llamar la atención sobre, como invitación, y que estoy muy agradecido otra vez al CIM por esta convocatoria a la conversación, de una manera siempre tan oportuna y con muy buenas ideas para trabajar, agradecer y dejar o abrir la conversación sobre estas nuevas configuraciones de lo social y dejando la pista sobre estas tres escalas, ¿no? Que apenas produje o sugería algunos ejemplos en las tres dimensiones, la temporalidad, la espacialidad y la intercorporalidad, como instancias para repensar el problema de lo social nuevamente, insisto, con fronteras adentro, conteniéndonos lo natural, lo que mal llamábamos lo natural, lo humano, mal llamado lo social, y lo tecnológico, todos involucrados. Muchas gracias.
Bueno, muchas gracias Gastón. Muy interesante el recorrido que hiciste, seguramente vamos a volver sobre esto. Vamos ahora con la última de las intervenciones así planteadas para el día de hoy, y luego vamos a abrir el diálogo, así que lo escuchamos a Mon Rodríguez Amat. Mon, this is your turn.
Hello, everyone. Hi. Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you, Sim, for letting me be here today. Now I'm just going to switch this off because there's a lot of activity going all across the multiple platforms and all across multiple ways, and it's particularly interesting because we're talking like from the three corners of the world in some way, and that's very interesting, and that's why I want to mention. Also, Hantian, I'm very happy that you're here. Hi, Hantian, and some other colleagues that just kind of drop in and come out. And I think this is a good symptom. It's a good symptom for SIM. It's a good symptom for what these events kind of intended to be, and how somehow it's growing into a kind of showing its international profile and showing the possibilities of further dialogues and further activities like this one. But you will have to allow me. I will join a little bit what Gaston was mentioning a minute ago about keeping it informal. About Paulo was also in that tone, and I will stick to it. And I would like to kind of appeal to this with a little bit of a cheeky side. So thank you again for inviting and for this crazy global meeting in these crazy times we live in, and I will try to put my talk a little bit aside from the two lines that have been shown, the concept, the wording, the language that's been developed, as in Paulo's explanation and Gaston's perspective on how the networks have become visible and how these kind of new arrangements of society have become visible because of these conditions we live in. I would, however, like to go for a little bit the dark side of what happens, and I know I've been kind of labeled as in the one that brings the pessimistic tone to the story. I will do this with a smile, and maybe it just makes things a lot easier. And I will try to do it by eventually talking about porn, which is something that just makes things festive, as in eventually, not forcefully. What I would like to say is to start talking about how a few months ago we approached this discussion about pandemic and about the new situation we lived in, and everybody was kind of so energetic at writing about it and at thinking about it and trying to find the best kind of corner of thought to open a strand of discussion. And in the meantime, we have realized that this pandemic, this new situation, kind of stretches our capacities to work and our capacities to live. And we work in terms of, for those of us who are in academia, we work in an environment that has had to adapt very fast to a new environment and to the new conditions. And this adaptation, this movement of adaptation for these institutions that try to survive the new conditions and therefore change their old situation, change their old contract by keeping some sort of essence of it, but at the same time changing the ways we do it, has forced these institutions to adapt and pool resources and go and show, in a way, those senses out of what works, what doesn't work, and asking more and more to the students if they were engaged, if they weren't, if the teaching was working, if it wasn't at all, setting a whole new environment of learning and teaching. And that has its positive side. It has helped us to see how aerodynamic the teaching can become, how lighter it can be, how less of a church-like kind of structure can be reproduced in the classroom. But at the same time, it has done it at an enormous price of stretching us as workers within this academic space, stretching our capacities, and doing this in a way that it's very perceivable with people who work part-time or people who work by hours. We've realized that the same amount of work that was paid the same amount of money requires a lot more in terms of energy, in terms of dedication, in terms of time. Now that we work online in this very light form, that we don't even need the classroom to do the same job. And that kind of stretching activity that has been happening has stretched us as also in our capacity to translate our teaching into an online, but also not only taking the time of work, but also taking our time for thinking. And that is what I would like to reivindicate today, to claim today. It's the headspace that forces this very last meeting of the year to be something that has to be informal. I literally didn't find the time to put this together in a PowerPoint. I didn't find a way to stretch these in between my daily obligations. I realized that teaching takes a lot more time, that all meetings take a lot more time, that there's a lot less of corridor. Hola. Hola, hello. Hi. Hi, we're back. Apologies for that. This very nice person, this very smart geek has decided to basically to scrape the web, probably Twitter or probably something else, and found the link and got in, kicked me out, blocked my profile, and left, which is a funny game to do for the times we live in. And that's what happens when you organize this kind of public events and you show publicly the links and don't make them kind of you make yourself vulnerable. It's like getting someone entering the rooms when there is like these G7 meetings or something like that, which is fun, and we kind of think it's interesting. So sorry, I got a little bit lost and kicked out. Am I allowed to go on now? I was kind of passionate talking about headspace and talking about how these stretching need of adaptation of the institutions basically ended up taking us or stealing our own headspace, and with it not only the serendipitous encounters that happen in corridors that are extremely creative and extremely fruitful, and you solve a lot of things in the corridor in the 5-minute chat that we just go across, and now you have to organize a full hour meeting. And instead of that, we've lost it, and we are also dedicating a lot of hours in front of the screen, hours that don't allow us to think, to properly think slow and elaborate the thinking. And what happened at the very beginning, when everybody was trying to write massively and produce all these amounts of contents about what's going to be with the pandemic, what happens now, what's the situation, and all those books, even the volume edited by Sim that was published earlier this year, that kind of thinking was product of our reserve, of our capacity, that just leftovers of headspace that we had from when we started. That was 9 months ago. In these 9 months, we've ended losing, erosioning that space, that little corner of capacity that we had. And now, I don't know you guys, but I am absolutely knackered. I'm terribly, terribly tired. I feel that I do not have the capacity to think new things, to think new thoughts. And this is a collateral of that pandemic that we are having now. In 9 months, we've learned to bake bread, we've learned to make puzzles, we've learned to walk and to find that to take care of that kind of health, mental health thing. But that's not enough. We we need a little bit more of refreshment. And I feel that we miss some of that. So we had run out of that headspace, and I don't know, but my focus, as in citing Paulo again, you know, the more I zoom, the less I focus. And this loss of focus has brought me to this position in which what I think is that we need to be particularly careful. We need to be careful because the things are happening now, and they are important things that are happening now, 9 months after that first pandemic situation, and we ran out of energy to be aware of it, to pay attention to it, to look at those data that was there, to organize ourselves, to just get things done, to build. And because the time to organize in this new normal, we are now the ones who should be taking care of ourselves and make sure that those institutions that took that exceptional situation 9 months ago and said, oh, it's exceptional, you have to prepare your teaching online, you're going to be doing your videos online, you're going to, and we realized that we have to spend more time on that. But those institutions were talking about exceptionality 9 months ago and still talk about exceptionality today. And this exceptionality, that's already a gestation, a full baby, you know, a gestation process, it is a very delicate moment we are in when we run out of our own energy and capacity to think about what is the next new thing. And I would like to make a look at what happens out there for a minute. And what happens out there is that Google crashed yesterday for 45 minutes and the world stopped. Literally, the world stopped because 45 minutes, no YouTube, no Google Meet, no Google any form of the massive alphabet thing. 45 minutes that just got the world to stop. And that is one of the things that happens now with this kind of situations. And that's an example, but there's more. Actually, I said it at the beginning, I would like to talk about porn. And I want to talk about porn because Pornhub, the website, has been a good metaphor, a good example of what has happened over the last 9 months. The 11th of March of 2020, Pornhub decided to open free premium access to the whole Italians that were in their first lockdown. 15 days later, they did that to Spain, and after that, they did to France, and after that, they did for the rest of the world. For a few months, Pornhub has become an open access, kind of free premium access to all the areas of this porn platform. And that's interesting because at that time, there was this kind of, if you want, remote form of happiness about the possibility of doing things online amongst each other, you know, the doing the porn thing. And I want to mention that case because not only porn consumption and traffic on Pornhub increased by 60 to 70% across the different countries, and the statistics are out there, they're public. Pornhub is very proud of publishing this on a regular basis. Not only that, but also this last 4th of December, a very strong ultra-conservative Catholic campaign in the United States has generated an article on the New York Times that was denouncing Pornhub and abuses and child abuse and whatever else. That reaction echoed on Visa and MasterCard, who decided cut all the funding possibilities and all the possibilities of you acquiring, or you, whoever uses that, of course, and use those platforms for the trading. It's not only Pornhub. Actually, Pornhub is built on piracy. What feeds from those MasterCards and Visa are sex workers that are completely unregulated and completely on the side, suffering that kind of new measures. That kind of action forced Pornhub the 11th of December, so last week, to come out with a huge amount of measures about its own internal moderation system, about the user and the ways of accreditation of the users that have to be now certified users, and the uploading and downloading regulation established as a new system that was very, very crazy, kind of more regulated. It's not open as it was. Beyond whatever the contents of those discussions, and I really, really do not want to go on that road, I want to remind that by doing these, by setting up these measures about moderation, about content, about regulation, about users, is because Pornhub has been acknowledged as a social media platform. And this is something that forces and activates a whole new area of research, the research of social media platforms, the platformization processes. And the platformization processes, as we know, are not about only the social interactions and the social networks that we build through them, on the back of them. It's also because these social media platforms have discussions about labor and exploitation of the users. They have discussions about copyright and ownership of the data that's being processed. They have discussions about that social interaction that comes as an exchange for that, free data, free generation of content. And finally, with these data privacy issues. Well, Pornhub does that, but it's not the only one. It's not the only one that does it, because there are other social media platforms happening there. So this is a very delicate time, because, as I said, looking at porn is very much like looking at the canary in the mine. When things happen in the porn industry, it's because sooner or later they echo outside the other environments. And actually, this is what has been happening in the European Union today. And yesterday was published this draft for 2 new acts of regulation that are massive, and I can be very positive about them. These are 2 drafts of regulation that come probably 20 years late, but they finally came as very innovative pieces of regulation, and nobody speaks here from the European Union. Actually, we are Brexited in the UK. You are in Argentina, and Paolo is in Canada. So who cares about Europe, right? At the same time, we have this reference, because these 2 pieces of law that are called Digital Market Act and Digital Service Act are 20 to 25 years late, because they substitute the e-commerce regulation. And the e-commerce regulation was particularly interesting because that was the law that decided that social media platforms were not media. And that regulation was the one that allowed Google and Facebook and whatever other social media you can think of, starting with MySpace or what else, those were not social media platform. Therefore, nobody had to regulate their gatekeeping roles. It has been 25 years later that this regulation came to place, and it has set up these gatekeeping roles for those social media platforms. It has forced them for the interoperability, which means that you can access the social media platforms owned by Android without having an Android. So you can cross the borders of these kind of territories that were closed, the Apple iSlave kind of territory, that now you can access the Apple apps without having to play with an Apple device, and also has allowed us to share and to access the data that these platforms use. And that is a massive move for the research, because this data is not anymore enclosed within the territories of those social media platforms, but is become something that us as researchers can use. And we can use it also because they are part of our territory of discussion. They are now considered to be media. Therefore, we need to study them. And therefore, we have a strong territory of opportunities to explore and to research that thing that's happening from today in this draft. And here we are now, exhausted, stretched, trapped in institutions that try to adapt themselves to these circumstances, and doing this at the price of extenuating us, at the price of abusing our headspace. And now that we should be learning about how to deal with data, how to deal with platforms, how to study them, and the recommendation systems, there is a strong recommendation issue coming with this new regulation place. Now we don't have the headspace to do it because we're tired. That's it.
Well, thank you very much. Very shocking, I could say. A very shocking perspective. Now we will open the dialogue between the three of you, and then we will open also to the discussion with the audience. I don't know if any one of you would, Paola.
I'll go first. So thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. A couple of comments on Gaston's. Well, for reminding the intersection between culture, technology, and nature. Now, by chance, last week, word of the year was climate emergency. And eventually, the pandemic, the virus, and so on, it's an effect of the climate emergency. It's deeply rooted into that. And so, a natural problem caused by human technologies. Now, basically, we are coping with this problem using some technology. A vaccine is a technology, right? Is a health technology to some extent. It's that. And so we are trying to fix a technological problem using some new technologies, right? And I like to quote Neil Postman in dealing with the effects of technologies. And so we cannot solve a problem caused by technology with another technology. We need to solve this kind of problems with a cultural solutions. So we need cultural solutions to technological problems, not other technological solutions, but we need cultural solutions. And talking about, so this way I think the relation between nature, technology, and culture deals with the way we are coping with it. And following Mon's approaches, so why we are tired, why we are vulnerable. So we are vulnerable, I think, because we are facing these brand new problems and issues with old frameworks. Even with talking about language, we are using old words to cope with these new problems. And so we came with the idea of smart working, the remote working, smart work. I don't know why they call it smart. I think it's a unique thing. So they start to work smart working. I think in Argentina as well, in Italy, blended learning. So when they're learning online and in blended learning, and then virtual, which I don't know what does that mean. And then we came up in Canada, dual delivery. So essentially, we are using all the words to cope with this new scenario. And I like to quote McLuhan. He said, we are looking at the future through a rear view mirror. So essentially, we are not aware. We are still in the 20th century. Someone said that the 21st century started in 2020 with the global pandemic. So maybe finally we entered into the 21st century, but we need new concepts, new words, new ideas to cope with this brand new scenario. Otherwise, I think that we are vulnerable because we are still using all words, all the frameworks, all the I cannot read my notes here. All the regulations, all the laws, right? You mentioned, indeed, with the information environment, we were not ready. Regulations were not ready, were not adaptable to this scenario. Laws and business models were not ready, and so on. So again, we are still in the 20th century. We are still using old frameworks to cope and deal with something new. That's why, again, rather than just using new technological solutions to that, a larger broadband or larger computer for Zooming or whatever, rather than finding new technologies to solve these technological problems, we should find some cultural solutions. That's in a nutshell.
Comento muy brevemente el comentario de Pablo, que me parece muy interesante, pero prefiero darle más espacio en todo caso aquí al resto de las personas que están participando. Pero coincido con lo que dice Carlos en el chat, que el aceleracionismo tecnológico propone más soluciones tecnológicas, es como una especie de círculo o espiral, digamos, que va escalando. Pero eso no es muy distinto, creo yo, Pablo, a lo que sucede a nivel también cultural, digamos. La especie humana buscó soluciones humanas para los problemas humanos, o inclusive peor, produce problemas desde la propia, llamémosle, humanidad, para los cuales no tiene ninguna solución. Un poco la mentira o el autoengaño de la modernidad fue creer que las ciencias y las tecnologías nos daban la solución a todas las cosas, y la demostración es que siempre hay problemas para los cuales todavía no está creado el sistema y el problema, pero no se ha creado la solución, ya llegará. Y no obstante, es como esa fuerza que sigue creyendo que bueno, trabajemos para encontrarla, la solución, no es que eso se deja por resuelto. Y entonces, ahí me parece que esa red ha hecho que nos vayamos retroalimentando sobre nuestra propia escala de situaciones, pero el problema es que siempre aumentamos los niveles o las complejidades de las escalas. Y la otra cuestión es que problema y solución son un modo de mirar un punto en la red. Mirado hacia un lado es un problema, mirado para el otro es la solución, pero siempre la red sigue creciendo. Mientras no se anudó un nuevo tiento a esa red, estamos en estado de problema. Luego va a aparecer como una solución para un nuevo problema. La propia dinámica está doblemente aspectada. No sé si se comprendió, Pablo. Gracias.
Mon, no sé si estás interesado en hacer un comentario a la intervención inicial de Pablo.
Of course I am. Yeah, of course I am. And I think I like the provocation, Paul. I think it's brilliant. The technology, yes, as a solution or as a problem or both, or where I think that the issue here lies at what price, or at whose price, or on whose back, right? The technology in itself, whatever is made be done, in that sense, is not that technology is going to save us from the humanity, and it's basically technology is going to be used by humans to take care of other humans, to abuse of other humans, and in that sense, for the solution and the problem are not technological problems. They are defined by humans, and these humans design those problems or define those problems from a particular interest and from a particular perspective. And by doing that, we don't only see whether this is or this is no, that the problem has an author, has an origin, has a point of starting. And because it has this starting point and this production point, we have to look at what it hides and what it intends to be. It wouldn't have been a problem if, or it would have been another kind of problem, or it would have required another kind of stretching if, institutions had prepared for that kind of online move earlier, or this integration, as it's been said for the last 20 years, this integration of social media platforms with the teaching offline and the classrooms had kind of been in the agenda of whoever decided to invest on bigger buildings and on bigger classrooms and put more students in that same space. That would have been another way of approaching the problem. That would have been also another way of discussing the issue. And I'm just focusing on the teaching situation. But and therefore the problem wouldn't have been necessarily a technological issue. And I think it's also kind of relevant for us to bring that back, the humans, to see to what extent humans are in. I have this mania to humanize kind of technology, to politicize it, but I think it's a way kind of approaching it, that kind of dialogues with that.
I totally agree, and I wanted to, well, our friend Carlos Scolari, just quoting the idea of accelerationismo, acceleration, reminds me of Paul Virilio, the Dromotic, and so on. So the idea that we are running fast, absolutely, we're running so fast, and but I don't think this is a problem. So because of the acceleration of technological developments, I think of other fields such as AI, machine learning, and so on. The idea is not running fast, but the kind of direction we want to take. And sometimes, well, from a neoliberal North American perspective, usually they let the markets run so fast, and then regulations come to mitigate and so on. I think this is the moment to realize that, yes, we can keep running fast, but and taking some principles such as ethics, such as equity, such as ecology, and many other common values that we can learn even from this pandemic, and taking those values by design, and so designing technologies that are already able to capture and embed this kind of values. Rather than just following the market, right? So I think that's an important point. And well, so from a more communication semiotic perspective, I think that it's important to highlight where the ideologies are masqueraded, are the ideologies related to the market, related to the neoliberal and business models. This kind of ideologies can be revealed, unveiled, can be captured, and can be stopped when needed, in terms of, okay, let's build this infosphere in a different way. So I think from a language, communication, semiotic perspective, there's a lot of room for again, stopping this kind of ideologies before it's too late.
Acá, Carlos, en el chat mencionaba, respondiéndote a lo que acababas de decir, Pablo, I'm sorry, I'm talking in Spanish. Carlos said in the chat when you were talking that it's not only about the acceleration capitalism, it is supposed to be a political answer to that acceleration. In political and social theory, accelerationism is the idea that capitalism and its historical associated processes should be accelerated instead of overcome in order to generate radical social change. Además de estas intervenciones, se habían anotado en la lista...
Absolutely interesting. And no, just let me comment on the idea of slow food, slow everything. Com'è decrescita felice, as in the degrowth, the decrescita felice. So yeah, that's another narrative, right? To counterbalance the capitalistic neoliberal society. But yeah, I agree with Carlos. That narrative does not necessarily help to cope with the acceleration of society, and absolutely.
Mencionaba antes que quería intervenir Sandra Vallecaro, José Luis Fernández. No sé si Carlos Scolari quería decir algo también, pero bueno, abrimos el micrófono entonces a Sandra.
Un pequeño comentario, una asociación rápida, a quick association. Because I was, se ríen, voy a practicar my Spanglish. A quick association about the relationship between nature and technology. because I was thinking the example of the foam, ¿se pronuncia foam? ¿Espuma? Foam.
Sí, yes.
That gave Gaston, and José Luis wrote in the chat sobre la específica diferencia de la espuma en lo biológico humano y en la máquina. Fíjense that it is a very small example about the how we are compelled to think differences, as Bateson said, because it's not the same, the biological one with the technological machine. Por eso la espuma, ahí donde la espuma nos hace bien en la biología, le hace mal a la máquina. I think nosotros tenemos que ser capaces, we have to be able to think the relationship, the complex relationships between these. Cecilia Checopar wrote about the semiosfera que diluye la biosfera. How is this interface or this link? And I think that we can, via Latour, via Simondon y via Bateson, it's very important to volver a pensar, to rethinking this relationship, because if not, I feel that it's all soggy wet mass, nos decía una profesora de inglés. Soggy wet mass. Quería decir eso nada más, que se me produjo esa rápida asociación de la máquina de lavar, la washing machine, y las manos con esa intermediación de la espuma. ¿Qué pasa ahí, no? En esa interfaz naturaleza-cultura, o biología, porque también nosotros decimos naturaleza, nature, and the biological in the nature is another side of the nature. We have to think the difference, I suppose. Gracias.
Gastón, me parece que el comentario fue dirigido sobre todo a vos. No sé si querés responder a Sandra o si seguimos adelante con José Luis.
No, es general porque, digamos, está sacado de lo que estábamos hablando de, bueno,
perdón.
de las crisis que están en estas fronteras supuestas entre naturaleza, tecnología, cultura, pero como sin embargo hay cuestiones micro, me gustó mucho eso de lo micro de la espuma, que pensó Gastón, que claro, uno nunca qué sé yo, también la espuma era como un juego casi erótico, si se quiere. La espuma en la vida de lo humano está asociado más a una cuestión erótica, a su papá, qué sé yo, pero bueno, pero no a esta cuestión higienista que aparece, ese saber de lo higiénico que aparece ahora en la pandemia. Entonces, ¿cómo eso pone en crisis un pequeño ejemplo, un pequeño detalle de la vida cotidiana, de la everyday way life, de la ordinary life, cómo pone en crisis todo aquello que podamos pensar en el vínculo naturaleza, biología, cultura, tecnología? O sea que es más general, porque ahí Cecilia Checopar intervino, José Luis intervino, Carlos con Latour. Yo dije, bueno, yo iría por Simondon para este tema, bueno, y así, como para charlar, hablar un poco. Bueno, Paolo is from Toronto School, so all the question about environments is the object of her studies, his studies. So,
does anyone want to make a comment of you three? Or we go ahead? Pablo, Gastón,
Yeah, I was going to comment on the spuma, the foam, and Carlos is an expert in the interface, and actually the spuma is the interface between the actual hand and whether we want to wash, and so we need that interface that provides a feedback, provides what's in between, right? The human and technology. And talking about the idea of interfacing, right, with this between the semiosphere, as Sandra said, that the semiosphere and the biosphere, biosphere. I think maybe the challenge is that in between, so how to interface those two spheres, and the legacy of Gregory Bateson, the systemic thinking, the holistic thinking that to some extent provides us with the framework for approaching all those issues from a global holistic perspective. And so we are part of a broader entity, which is the biosphere, but we are able to interact and change the biosphere dramatically, even with a backside effect on humans and humanity. And so I think that, yeah, I like the idea of retrieving the holistic thinking, retrieving that kind of a holistic framework generated by the cybernetics and the systemic thinking to deal with the current scenario. So from a holistic perspective, how can we rebalance the equilibrium of human species in this human planet from this kind of a holistic perspective? And I think the interface, what's in between the biosphere and the semiosphere, it's a crucial topic, definitely.
Well, thank you. Seguiríamos entonces con la intervención de José Luis, que se había anotado para hacer un comentario.
Bueno, well, if I understood well, I'm so excited because it's my first time in a public meeting that I agree everything with Monk. We discussed a lot in public sphere, but today, because I think that we are living and thinking in a tension in micro phenomena and macro explanation. We are a pandemic, globalization, nature, culture, technology, even acceleration are macro concepts, and in general terms, in fact, abstract concepts. The semiotics, the semantics, semiosphere, another semiosis, social semiosis, are macro concepts. In the presentation of Monk, I understood that his proposal is to build or to recognize and reivindicate the meso concepts, the meso levels, nor micro nor macro. We are working a lot of micro phenomena. Maybe the crisis, the pandemic situation, permit that us make a new step to meso levels, to interact with another point of view, another approaches. This is my thought about the discussion. The meso level is the only way to confront, to put face in front of the uncertain crisis. Nothing more.
Bueno, gracias. Gracias, José Luis. Si hay...
Tarzanian English, but I read a lot.
Sí, me quiere hablar, me parece.
Sí, a vos te habías notado,
Yes.
perdón, no te vi acá en la lista. Ah, sí, sí.
Yes, me. Okay, I will try in English also, right? Well, I don't know if all of you, but some of you know that I study from a semiotic point of view, ecological topics. So for me, thinking about biosphere and semiosphere is like, come on, it's my issue. And since we, from our semiotic point of view, our semiotic approach, based on Veron and Peirce and, well, other ones like Christian Metz, we always analyze and put in the first, as a first step of analysis, the material dimension. So since this moment, since this thing is the first thing that we have to analyze when we go to any corpus, I think that biosphere and semiosphere shouldn't be two separate things, because biosphere is necessarily the material substract of culture, of anything else. So this is a continuum. Each analyst will put boundaries in different parts in different points of this continuum. But from my point of view, this is a continuum. So we can't think about nature and culture as two different steps. I think this is something old that we have already many thinkers that have shown that there is no a discontinuity. There is not a separation. This is from one side, and the other comment I wanted to bring was about the foam, because in fact foam, it's a lot of bubbles. It's a lot of different bubbles, and I think another important word or important notion in this pandemic is the concept of bubble. For here in schools, there are bubbles. Also, if you have you spend your lockdown with another family, it's a bubble. So bubble, it's also kind of a small boundary, or not, could be small or not, where you are inside, maybe even protected. So we also should take this into account. Thank you.
Thank you, Jimé. Tenemos hasta las 5 de tiempo, es decir, que nos quedan 15
Sloterdijk,
minutos.
yes, Sandra, Sloterdijk.
Sí, decía, tenemos hasta las 5, así que bueno, gracias Jimé por tu intervención. Se había propuesto también Emiliano Vargas para hacer un comentario. Él sería el último comentario del público y después vamos a hacer una pequeñísima ronda entre los tres que expusieron para ver si quieren retomar algo de estas últimas intervenciones. Así que, Emiliano, te escuchamos.
Yes, hello. This is thank you for your interventions. This is a great opportunity for work my English talking. I was thinking on the Gaston Cingoliani intervention. I found interesting discussion about big level, meso level, and micro level, and the scales that you, Gaston, are talking. I found in my lectures, in my research, some researchers that here in Italy talk about an idea and a concept who call intervals for talk and for approach together the things that the space, the time, and the aesthetics levels. I don't know. I found interested for share with you this. One of that researchers, it's called Marco Di Noi. I think personally that he make an approach, a deeper approach about this concept with some methodological aspect that I found interesting. And that's all. I was thinking in the level of mediatization, how in the 3 levels of mediatizations makes this changing in the pandemic context. For example, I found that in the level of the technical devices of some platforms like Instagram or Spotify, first Instagram, I found that in the context of pandemia, the intervals of mediatization or these scales have a type of changing in that we found more, I call transparent effect, because the filters of the mediatization of the publication that the collective where I research. Okay, this. But okay, I have problems with my English. I found that it was so transparent. Okay, this is the approach. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Gracias, Emiliano. We invite then Paulo, Gaston, and Mon. If you want to add something to what was recently said, we have time left, 10 minutes left until our closure time. So thank you very much again, and we invite you again to add something if you like to.
Well, I would like to conclude with this La vacuna somos todos. So the idea that, well, to some extent that goes into the idea of biosphere and semiosphere are two spheres are one and the same. So from a conceptual perspective, we need to I like the dichotomy from a conceptual perspective to better focus on how to make sense of the natural environment, the biosphere within which we live. So we need that interface of sense making to find what makes us humans in terms of beauty, symbols, a sense of life for how take care of our environment as well. So the sense we find in nature, it's part of the semiosphere, so that the reason why we undertake some things. And so conceptually, I like to keep the difference between semiosphere and biosphere, but I like to think practically as a kind of a holistic matter to deal with. And that's why we are the vaccine. We are, I like to think that we have the potential, right, as humans to make sense of what's going on around us, to cope with this pandemic, to build new worlds, new ideas, new concepts, right, for coping with this situation. And yeah, that's my final word. We have a potential. And the more we think in terms of this potential, this human potential, and the better we can again find in the way we are able to cooperate as a human species, the way we are able to retrieve that natural materialistic approach, which is also actually embedded into the Toronto School. So the way we retrieve that material roots of our semiosphere as a way to cope with this contemporary pandemic. And again, so we are the solutions. So humans are the solutions for the technological problems.
Well, thank you very much. Let's hope so. Gaston, Mon, are you there? Do you want to add something to this reflection?
Yo, si soportan lo mal que hablo el español, sigo hablando en español, no tengo problema. He sido el único esta noche, esta tarde, así que creo que... Bueno, no, solamente quiero agradecer primero, bueno, los comentarios que se hicieron, porque no por nada, sino específicamente porque sirvieron de disparadores de conversación, y eso está ya, de por sí ya es una ganancia con respecto a seguir tratando de ver un poco dónde esta situación generalizada nos cambió de escena. Puntualmente quiero volver sobre el comentario de Jimena, que me pareció muy interesante. Digamos, lo que me quedé pensando de lo que decía Jimena es que por ahí no fui lo suficientemente prolijo en mi exposición, y puse demasiado énfasis al inicio en esa separación entre clases de entidades, una separación que tiene una historia obviamente muy importante para Occidente, pero eso tiene digamos, un vuelo probablemente muy corto en la historia, la larga historia humana, digamos, no es realmente, no sé si es tan importante. A lo mejor es casi un pecado original de las propias ciencias sociales, que arranca con esta tradición ya asumida, digamos, esa división, quiero decir, ¿no? Lo interesante de los libros de Escolá es cómo él hizo un trabajo de comparación entre culturas, en donde revisó que hay culturas muy distintas, donde la división entre lo humano y lo natural está completamente trazado en fronteras absolutamente diversas, y es la constatación de esa precariedad y de esa pequeña porción de historia que cree que dio con la verdadera división de nuestro universo, ¿no? Entre el mundo natural y el mundo humano, cultural. Eso por un lado, pero por otro, yo quería, y no lo hice con la suficiente claridad y tiempo, hacer hincapié que a mí me interesa de las redes más que la reunión de clases de entidades distintas. También valoro el aporte en eso de Carlos cuando trajo Latour. Bueno, yo creo que también lo mencioné, pero me parece bien. Pero me parece que lo que en Latour no es claro es en la clase de relaciones que se establecen en esas redes. Y a mí es lo que más me interesa. No me interesa tanto si lo cultural o lo humano y lo biológico, natural y lo tecnológico se pueden o no unir. Eso es una cosa que es quedarse en una especie ya a esta altura de una anécdota pasajera y mala, sino que hay que pensar sobre las clases de relaciones que se producen. Y ahí vuelvo a decir que las escalas de esas relaciones, en dos sentidos, las que acá siempre José Luis nos recuerda, las micro, meso y macro, funcionan todas en niveles distintos y con arreglos y determinaciones distintas. No hay una que determine a la otra. Eso es otra mala herencia del biologicismo, que por suerte hace mucho ya se abandonó, que creer que lo micro, visto en términos moleculares o atómicos, sobredeterminaba lo macro. Nosotros éramos seres, éramos muchos átomos, digamos, y parte de esa división que creció entre lo humano y lo natural es que se supo que esas dimensiones no están interdeterminadas de esa manera, bueno. Sino en otro, el aspecto de las escalas que yo hoy mencioné, que es una escala, que es lo de las escalas espaciales, temporales, intercorporales, pero como un puro ordenamiento epistemológico, no tiene ningún correlato con el mundo fuera de esa epistemología. Y a mí me parece que sobre todo hay que trabajar con eso, con revisar las relaciones que hay entre esas instancias. Y bueno, nada, me parece que ese es el próximo desafío, en los próximos años, quiero decir, donde se establecen los tipos de relaciones que hay entre lo humano. Una de esos ejercicios es que se modificó tremendamente se modificó en el sentido de se revitalizó, para bien o para mal, el lugar de la ciencia en las sociedades contemporáneas, ¿no? Parecía que era una especie de cosa extinguida. ¿Quién hablaba de la ciencia fuera de la ciencia hace un año? Nadie. Y ahora la ciencia está todo el tiempo en la agenda, aunque sea para decir que es una porquería, o que está equivocada, o que es la madre del problema, pero se volvió a discutir. Y eso me parece que la ciencia es un ejemplo de redefinición de las relaciones entre naturaleza, cultura y tecnología por caso. Así que, bueno, te agradezco, Jimena, el comentario, lo mismo Sandra y el resto.
Bueno, ya estamos llegando al final. No sé, Mon, si estás ahí, que no te veo ni te escucho. No
Se
querría...
ofendió porque hablé mucho y en castellano.
Sí, sí estoy.
Ah, bueno.
Sí estoy aquí en la esquinita
Estaba
porque
preocupada.
a veces me quiero poner en silencio y termino quitándome de la charla y después tengo que volver. O sea, disculpas, el factor humano interviene. Solo aquí apuntar la celebración enorme que es recibir la comunión de Fernández en esta discusión pública. Oh, sorry, I just moved to Spanish. Yeah, I celebrate this communion, sacred communion we just had. Fernández, I think there is a beautiful space there of a bridge conversation. That was the plan at the beginning, right? To build a dialogue, to build a conversation. And I think what has happened across the interventions today has a lot to do with that. And because at the meso level is where the networks happen. It's also where the networks kind of get from one side the entity, and from the other you have the level of abstraction that's necessary for them to be networks, to appear as meaningful connection and as conglomerates and assemblages. And what I would just add is the killer question of the "and so what?" Why would we care about where the nature is, where the culture is, where what kind of constellation of words we use? And I that's something Paolo triggered, and something that connects with what Gaston said, and something that I actually wanted just kind of to bring together as kind of this mesh of opportunity. And it is this and so what do we care about? What happens at the end of it? Why do we want to look at this distinction? And what does it bring if we look at them? So I think it would be the my point here at the end, and to celebrate that we're actually having a global conversation, happening from the most of the pessimistic perspectives that I could formulate, and still we're able to talk across the world, across the ocean, up and down, in a rather friendly, comfortable, and easy, straightforward manner. So, I mean, what else, right? That's it. So, thank you.
Bueno, gracias a ustedes. Thank you very much to all of you. We are coming to the end. Yes, the Sim bubble. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Sí, gracias a los tres.
Gracias.
Thank you. Don't forget the unprecedented word search. I'll send it to you, and you can.
Please send it.
Yes, no, I think there have been triggered very interesting issues to continue thinking about, and let's hope that we will be able to do it soon, maybe in 2021. So thank you very much to all of you again, and have a nice year.
Bye.
Muchas gracias.
Chao.
Después podemos enviar el link para que lo repliquen en las universidades.
Ah, sí, me estaba olvidando. Esto está siendo grabado y lo vamos a subir a nuestro canal de YouTube.
Por favor.
All right.
Chao.
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 Muchas gracias.
Felicidades.